One of the things some people will be watching for in this week's economic update is whether there'll be any increase in federal subsidies for clean technologies. Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson is on the record already saying the Trudeau government will have to do more to catch up to the Biden administration in the U.S., which has announced hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies to hydrogen and batteries and carbon capture and storage. Warren Mabee is the director of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Policy at Queen's University, and he joins us now. Professor Mabee, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with what we've been hearing, many calls for Canada to up its game in terms of clean energy incentives and subsidies. Biden administration, it's announced more than $400 billion Canadian in incentives over 10 years. That's for hydrogen, carbon, EV batteries, etc. What's your reaction to those calls for us to up our game?
It'd be very hard for us to compete directly with the United States, and we've seen this before. When the U.S. decides to open up the floodgates, it makes a big difference because they are the biggest funders of R&D and new technology development in the world. We saw this years ago with biofuels, where they really invested heavily in biofuels over a very short period and moved the needle significantly. We're seeing it again around hydrogen now and carbon capture and different technologies. Canada can't compete with all of those one-on-one. I do think it's important that we stay competitive, but we're probably going to have to pick our battles. Which battle do we really want to fight? Which technology do we really want to chase?
Which one do you think we should? I'll put you on the spot.
That's a good question. I think that we do have some big advantages with hydrogen and the hydrogen economy, and certainly Alberta's been leading the way on a lot of development in that space. It's nice because it fits well with our existing expertise in oil and gas, and it's nice because hydrogen is a dispatchable energy source. It's an energy source with some problems, but it is a dispatchable energy source, and that's one of the things that we really need to complement things like solar and wind. That are abundant but not dispatchable, intermittent at best, and hard to predict.
What about carbon capture technology? Because I think when Jonathan Wilkinson, I referenced the Natural Resources Minister, was quoted on it, he seemed to be reacting to the fact that the States has gone out so much further, faster on tax breaks, basically, for carbon capture technology. As you know, in the environmental community, doesn't seem to be of one mind on whether carbon capture and sequestration capture is even working or worth giving tax breaks to.
Yeah, and it is a very controversial technology. Certainly the environmental community here in Canada and elsewhere around the world has seen that technology often as a subsidy for the oil and gas sector, who would utilize the technology first and probably foremost. I think that it works, and there's really good evidence that it can work, but it can be expensive. And so technologies that can help add value to that process, whether it's taking carbon out of the air and turning it into something useful, whether it's technology that can actually, save us money somewhere else in the system, that's probably where we need to go with this. But yeah, it's going to be controversial no matter how you slice it.
It's also controversial because the way it was announced in the last budget, there's a sort of a phase-out incentive. We will give you a tax cut, but that tax cut is disappearing in 10 years' time. In other words, we want you to get out of the business of emitting.
That's right, yeah. And a lot of people really can't square the circle of the oil and gas sector investing in these technologies, but also phasing out their production. And if we're really going to achieve the very deep emission reduction targets that we've set, a large portion of those emissions that come with oil and gas production have to be phased out. There's really no two ways around it.
Okay, last point briefly, and this is just sort of a thumbnail sketch. Canada and all the other international delegations are heading into COP27 this weekend. Starts this weekend in Egypt. What's on the agenda?
So there's a bunch of things. They're going to focus on emissions and try to, once again, get the world to focus on bringing those emissions down. Certainly, we've seen reports lately that it's not going down as fast as we need them to see them go. Okay. There's going to be a focus on adaptation, and we're seeing so much, in terms of flooding and fires and droughts around the world. We need to start adapting to that, and there'll be a lot of discussion. A lot of the focus, I think, will be on money, on the financing side. The parties have made a $100 billion a year commitment to help tackle climate change around the world. People want to know how that money is going to be spent and where it's going to be spent and what communities are going to benefit. So I think that's going to be a lot of the discussion at the meeting.
Last question briefly, we only have a few seconds, but how would you describe the atmosphere going into this COP27, this latest UN round, with a war going on in the world, with a recession looming, with inflation, with all sorts of regional conflicts, with the pandemic still looming over us? How would you describe the focus on COP27?
I honestly think it's a little less urgent than it has been in the past, although climate scientists still see the pressure and feel the pressure. I think the people around the world are reacting to those immediate concerns of energy security, war, and destabilization around the world, and that's where a lot of people's attention is focused.
Which doesn't necessarily bode very well for getting work done on the environment.
It might not go as well as we'd hope, although we can always hope for the best.
All right. Professor Mabee, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.